Welcome to this week's rant. If you've watched the earlier video, you know I've recorded a double header this week, hence the reason why I look like I'm in the same clothes. I am. This week's rant is entitled Legacy Purist or Not, and all will come clear in a couple of minutes. Actually, less than a minute. But before we get there, we must address the parish notices. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, why not? Hit the subscribe icon. If you want to be notified when this sort of content hits the channel, it's the bell icon as the next button to press. If you like this content to this video, you know what, give it a good thumbs up. It really helps the video with the YouTube algorithm. Consider, don't consider, join the TMTG community. The address is down there, as are the Facebook and Instagram feeds where the rest of the notices from the channel are posted. But now back to the video. I've addressed the clothes bit, haven't I? You saw that in the intro. I'm just reading my notes because the first line of my note says, yes, I'm in the same clothes. So I've been following a thread on one of the user groups that I follow. And over the last couple of weeks, this thread has been sort of kind of going backwards and forwards. And it split the contributors into kind of two camps. Camp 1, I've named the Purist. And this is the legacy instrument cannot be trumped and should be used to all costs. So if you've got an old ARP Odyssey, for argument's sake, or a Jupiter 8 or a Juno or a Moog or whatever it is, you should be using that machine to generate the sound. These machines should never be reimagined and they should never be cloned. They are what they are. The Camp 2 is the Pragmatist. These people say, I can't afford the original. I can't afford to drop £10,000 on a Jupiter 8. And therefore, I want the sounds of the original and I want to use them in my compositions. So I'm going to buy a reimagined instrument. I'm going to buy something that gets me close. Why did this conversation start? Well, the conversation quite started because for the last, I'm not sure how long, but Behringer have been tempting us with a reimagined version of the ARP 2600. So those of you who don't know what a 2600 looked like, there's going to be a picture of it up there. Okay, legacy machine from very long ago. I think this thing came from the 70s, if memory serves me correctly. You can't buy it. If you could buy it, would you? I don't know whether that's a question I should be asking. But what Behringer have done is reimagined this thing, and I use the word reimagine quite specifically because this is what Behringer have been doing over the last couple of years, is reimagining classic instruments. Instruments that the original author, vendor, manufacturer have put to one side and are not going to reimagine and reproduce that instrument. They're moving forward. And Behringer have dropped into this market space and said there is a market for this machine or that machine, the RD8 versus the TR808, for argument's sake. And they've identified a market for the ARP 2600. And while the machine looks very similar to the original, it's different. It produces tones in the same way the original did, but different. It has modern features on it. It's constructed using modern circuitry. It's different, but it's the same. And that's the reason why I use the word reimagined. The newer machine is designed to work with the modern musician. It's designed to work in a MIDI studio. It's designed to work in any studio, if truth be known. What Behringer have done is they've looked at the market, they've looked at the original instrument, and effectively come up with an instrument that pays homage to the original, but also has the modern features and is unlikely to go wrong every 5 minutes, like some of these older machines. And you don't have to leave it switched on for an hour just so that the various components can warm up so that it doesn't detune itself. So what is the purist argument? It's actually very simple. The original machine was released by ARP. The tone is generated using a series of analog circuits. This is what gives the machine its tonal qualities. The age of the machine provides quirks that makes it sound as it does. And that's the way the sound should be delivered to the recording device. The body of the machine will show signs of wear because it's been used by musicians for all these years. In short, it sounds better than the reimagined counterpart. That's kind of the argument that's been put forward by the purist. And now this is the argument that's been put forward by the pragmatist. And it's actually the pragmatist that actually triggered the debate that I've been watching. And I'm boiling it down because obviously you don't want to see all the messages that went backwards and forwards on the user group. So, let's be frank. Do you really want to buy a piece of equipment that's 45 years old? A 45-year-old analog synthesizer for that? Even if you could afford it. And I believe me, these things are going up in value. People were telling me, 15 years ago you could buy a Jupiter for not a lot of money. And all of a sudden, a Jupiter now, you're talking £10,000 for a good one. I did actually have a look around when I did this piece or did the research for this piece, and I was seeing 45-year-old ARP 2600s exchanging hands for in excess of £5,000. So, they are expensive. Now that you've bought this legacy synthesizer, now you've got to get it integrated into your setup, which means, getting DIN cables out and triggering CV and trying to make sure that things are properly tuned so that you actually are getting a C when you press a C. And then if you're lucky, somebody's fitted a retro conversion to it that hasn't actually buggered the circuitry up as part of the retrofit, because some of these guys who did these modifications on these legacy machines were utter cowboys compared with some of the standards we now operate to. And hopefully you might actually get your sequencer to talk to it as well. If you have inspiration, you can't just sit down at this thing and play and compose and be artistic. You've got to plug it in. You've got to leave it plugged in. It's got to warm up. You've then got to make sure the damn thing is tuned properly. There are lots of things about how these old machines work, the quirks. But it does interrupt your workflow. And if you're not prepared for that, it can be a real problem. And even if you bought a good example of a 2600, you're going to have to maintain this thing. And, one of the guys on the thread was saying that he regularly puts his 2600 in for maintenance every 2 years. Now, whether you need to put it in every 2 years, he is using his obviously all the time. So, it does require things to be done. And he's without it for, probably 2 months while it's being maintained. And the problem you have with a lot of this stuff is the guys that really understand how to maintain this stuff are starting to get old, and they're starting to sort of, drop down their workload. And it wouldn't, for a lot of legacy machines, it is not uncommon for the repairs to take 3 or 4 months. So if you send it off for maintenance, you could be looking to be without your synthesizer for that kind of period of time. And then there's how it works. How does it receive, and how does it send, and how do you program it? Remember, these machines didn't have memory as we currently know it. It's not a case of just dial up a patch and press go. You had to actually dial the patch in. That meant changing the knobs and the faders and positioning wires between different filters and VCOs and VFOs and all kinds of other weird and wacky things they put onto these machines. Remember, the 2600 was kind of like a cross between a synthesizer and a modular rack back in the day. In short, why would you not buy a reimagined machine? So where do I sit? A very good question, actually. And it was a question that I actually had to think about. But actually, it was a question that I knew where I sat before I asked the question. Firstly, let's be frank. I own a lot of legacy tech. I'm a collector. I love my legacy synthesizers. I love being in my workshop, especially now I've got my new workshop, which is where I'm doing this video from, and tinkering with my synthesizers to make sure they remain in full operational health. So I'm not adverse to getting a soldering iron out, and I'm not adverse to getting a screwdriver out, and I'm not adverse to actually getting into the machine to have a look at what potentially could be the problem. I also do know my limits. But technology has moved on. All the lab manufacturers are looking at how do they bring back the old equipment, or how do they bring the old equipment to life for modern musicians. Now, there is the whole VST argument going on here where, why do I need the old piece of equipment? I can just download the VST. Not me. I sit on the Pragmatist camp. It's quite simple. I don't have the money to drop on a Jupiter 8 or an ARP 2600 from the original. And I have to be honest and say, with an ARP 2600, would I do it anyway? I'm not really into the modular side of it. Jupiter, I'd love to own a Jupiter 8, an original Jupiter 8, but the reality of me dropping £10,000 on one of those, it's not going to happen unless somebody wants to will one to me. So these companies like Behringer are trying to effectively do this reimagineering, and they're kind of doing a good job at it as well. As much as the original manufacturer may sort of kick and scream, actually, this market was yours to lose, if I'm honest. And Behringer have just seen a very good gap in the market, and guess what? They're exploiting it. And do you blame them? No. But what they're very clever at doing is not actually doing a direct clone. That's why I'm saying it's reimagined. It's a clone that meets the modern criteria, but gives you the legacy instrument. I do look at the original manufacturers, who are, again, also looking to how to recreate these machines. Some are doing good jobs, some are doing pretty poor jobs. But there is a market for this sort of stuff. People like me who could never afford these machines back in the day. Why? Because I was a poorly paid accounting clerk at the time. I didn't have the money to go and drop £2,000, £3,000. I mean, let's face it, a couple of my synthesizers, brand new, were $8,500, $10,000. They're not worth that now, but that's what they were marketed at when they were new. I think Roland has done a fairly good job at trying to capture this market. I'm not so sure about Yamaha or Korg, to be honest. I think Roland have actually embraced this quite well and come up with a range of machines that do address the legacy machine requirement. But, that's where you need to go if you want a legacy Jupiter, Juno, or whatever it happens to be that you're after. You're not going to be able to afford unless you have deep pockets, the original. And to be honest, the originals are becoming scarcer because a lot of being cannibalized to supply parts for those that are still operational. That's how companies like Syntor make their money at the end of the day, selling parts to you and I to maintain your synthesizer, because you can't buy the parts on the open market because they don't make them anymore. System 8, Jupiter X also play into this market space. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. Until next time, live long and prosper. Bye-bye.